Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm here with AmyK, and Amy specializes in communication, but not just communication in general. She can focus, whether it's in the business world, in a boardroom scenario, right down to your family and communication tips to helping with your family. Amy, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, and I would love to dive right in. And my first question to you is, how did you get into this?
Probably a little bit circuitously, but I was that kid who was very comfortable with adults, but not with peers. And so I don't know about any of your Vistas members or your listeners, but I was that shy kid that always put her foot in her mouth or said something stupid and then would turn bright red. So if you had said to me as a kid, someday you're going to be this award-winning speaker on stage, I would have been like, no way. But here we are. And I think the one thread that's woven through all of it is that we all show up for difficult and tough conversations. And when we feel like we have a more thoughtful response, if we feel like we can think through our thoughts and be prepared, we get a much better outcome. And I think we all relate to that kind of conversation where we're like, hey, in the last 12 months, have you had one you'd like to redo? I think we all have.
Absolutely. I run into these all the time myself, and boy, it's good to be talking to a pro that can give us some tricks of the trade and how to navigate through that. So please tell me more.
I think one of the things that is important, so coming from it from a leadership perspective, one of the things that we now have the stats to prove is that most leaders will avoid a tough conversation on average 6 months to 2 years. So if you think about on average 6 months, yeah, some happen a little faster, but 2 years. So the underperformer, the person who's toxic to your culture, the difficult client that maybe has too much power and influence on your business, the longer that we avoid those conversations, the greater the toll is both financially and emotionally. And we now have stats, Scott, and I find this absolutely fascinating and also heart-wrenching, is that avoiding a tough conversation can cost up to $10,000 financially. And then you think about the emotional toll, the stress, the anxiety, the frustration of putting off a conversation. And so I'll just say really quickly that one of the things I truly believe and that I've been preaching in my entire 30 plus year career is that the life that we all want is on the other side of a tough conversation. And so the sooner we have it, the sooner we get back to the life we actually desire.
So here I am reflecting on tough conversations, and the idea that putting it off for 2 years, the buildup of stress and frustration along the way, that takes its toll.
It does. It does. And I think that we can also all relate to that conversation that we finally have, and we get through it, and it's like our shoulders drop and every muscle in our body relaxes, and we're like, oh, thank goodness that's over. Now I can start to move forward. And so the longer that we delay that, obviously, the greater the toll. And I think if we're being really candid, the reason that most leaders avoid that conversation is because they're afraid of making things worse. They're afraid of the unintended consequences, including even how to get that tough conversation started. And so that's where I come in, and I just love to say, look, let's set you up for success. Let's get you to navigate this conversation successfully so that the person sitting across from you can feel seen, heard, and understood. You can say what you need to say, draw a boundary, hit reset without creating more damage, and we can all move forward for a more profitable outcome.
Well, let's try to get very specific.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of what a typical CEO or key executive might be facing, and where they're getting stuck, and how you might get them to move it forward?
I'll do a classic one that happened just 2 days ago at a coaching call. So I'm talking with this gentleman, CEO of his company, and he says, I've got an underperformer, and, I'm meeting with him next week. And he's like, I just want to come in and say, let's talk about your underperformance. And I was like, okay, let's take a step back. So nobody wants to be invited to that meeting. Like, Scott, if you're my boss and you're like, hey, AmyK, come on in, let's talk about how you're not performing, I'm going to be like, no, thank you. I'm also going to be really defensive. And so just overarching that conversation with the framework of how might we make you a more integrated, successful team player? Or how might we set you up for greater success in Q2, Q3, Q4, wherever you are? I'm much more likely to get excited about coming to that conversation, or if excitement's too strong a word, at least I'm going to come more open than closed, contracted, and defensive. So just putting a framework around it. And there's this magical phrase that I use called how might we? And I've been using that since the 80s when I started teaching elementary school. And the how might we says you and I are going to co-create the next best steps forward, and your voice matters. And so now you've already done a psychological play to get that person to co-create with you on behavioral change. And I'm a big fan. So I went to grad school to study the brain. So I'm a big fan of putting the onus of critical thinking on the person that you're talking to. So that's a great way to get it started. And then the other thing that I think that's really important, especially when you're trying to get behavioral change and buy-in from somebody else, is to send that question in the meeting invite. So again, so Scott, you're my boss. So you send me an invite that says, hey, I want to meet with you next Tuesday, AmyK. We're going to talk about how might we make you a more integrated, successful team player. And then here's what I'd love from you. By Friday at 4 o'clock, I'd love to see 2 questions that you want to put as subset questions on the agenda. And so I'm already forced to play in my own thinking before the meeting even starts. And that's just a great jujitsu play to get me, bought in before. If I don't play, some of you are probably listening, well, what if they don't send you the 2 questions? Then that's another conversation. And that is, what's the resistance behind not sending me the questions? And notice I didn't say, why didn't you? Again, making somebody feel defensive. What's the resistance, or what prevented you? They might come back and say, I got the flu. It was nothing, I got the flu. It's like, okay. Or they might come back and they say, well, I'm not sure where this conversation is going, or I'm not ready to have it. That's all fabulous intel for you to then more successfully navigate where this outcome is going to go.
Amy, just how might I, or how might you, the thought of that, of somebody trying to help me with my career, you're right. I'm no longer going, boy, I'm dreading this conversation. I'm like anticipating. I can't wait to get there because I want to grow. And it sounds like you're trying to help me grow. So I can see how it's a real positive feeling.
It's a psychological play. There's this fabulous concept that I was introduced years ago. I lived in China, and somebody shared with me sort of this Taoist philosophy of soft front, hard back, meaning that I'm going to lean in to connect with you first, but then I'm going to have firm boundaries. And most of us get it reversed. We come in all strong and we come in all blustery and like, you need to perform better, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. And that person has no desire to change their behavior. They're too busy defending themselves. But when you lean in to connect first, when you say, hey, as an empathic leader, as an empathic listener and communicator, I want to be able to respond to you sensitively, to respond perceptively, so that you truly feel seen, heard, and understood. And then I have rules, and then I have boundaries, and then I have expectations. But if I connect with you first and then I'm firm, we're going to get a lot further than if I come in trying to bully you into better behaviors and then I back down. And so it's just the wrong order. And so to me, that was a fantastic reversal that I've used in my communication ever since.
Wow, that's a great tool and tip right off the bat. Hey, so that's business. How do you apply it to home life?
Everywhere. So I think we can all relate to. So here's a great phrase that I taught a lot in the pandemic, and that has kind of maintained its status for working. And it's the idea of giving people around you in your personal life a greater sense of control, especially with children in your household. And so I teach this a lot in professional settings, but it works beautifully at home too. And it's the magical phrase of, would you be willing? And as soon as I say, would you be willing, I'm giving you a greater sense of control and autonomy. And so would you be willing to start the project? Would you be willing to take out the trash? Would you be willing to start dinner? Would you be willing to, call the client back? So it allows somebody to say of their own accord, their own agency, yes, I would be willing to. Now, if they say no, then you can follow it with, oh, well, then what would you be willing to do? Or you can do this beautiful combination of the magical phrase, would you be willing? And then you give somebody 3 guided choices. And we know psychologically, if we give people 3, they're much more likely to choose one of the 3. So the example that I always give, because I use it at home a lot, is would you be willing to set the table, feed the dog, or unload the dishwasher? And then somebody will be like, oh, I'll set the table. And you're like, yes, one down, two to go. But the idea is by asking, I'm giving you that sense of autonomy to choose what it is that you're most excited or at least willing to do. And we're moving forward. And it's just a beautiful phrase. And again, if you feel like you're going to get resistance, then put in the guided choices.
Yep, I get it. Hey, so there's something you and I share in common, and that's Vistage. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience in Vistage and how you worked with that?
I joke, Scott, that I bleed teal, and serendipitously, I'm actually wearing teal today. So this was not meant to be, a planned thing. But I'm a huge fan of Vistage for several reasons. One, I was a member for 8 years, and just being a part of an incredible group of diverse thinkers, diverse backgrounds, and industries really elevated the way that I played as a leader of my own company. And I've been a speaker for Vistage. We were just talking about this the other day, almost 22 years now. And I've had, and I use this word purposefully, I've had the privilege of speaking to over 2,600 groups around the globe.
Wow.
And I love it. And the reason that I love it is because Vistage just attracts super bright, super strong, capable people who are still intellectually curious, who are still challenging themselves to grow. And so as a speaker, it's been really rewarding for over 2 decades.
That is fantastic. Well, I got to tell you, that's a lot of practice you've got on your speeches to get those in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what else can we learn from you? And do you have a favorite experience in one of your Vistage meetings?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna reverse engineer that one. One of my favorite experiences, which happened a lot, was the executive session. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with exactly how Vistage works, maybe you're thinking about joining, there's this beautiful part of the day where you get together as a roundtable, a mastermind, and you process an issue for somebody. And it's this beautiful collaborative process where you harness all the collective intelligence, everybody shares their input, their perspective, and it really widens how you might approach solving the problem that you're dealing with. And so it's kind of that Socratic moment where Socrates famously asked, what am I missing? Well, you're in the executive session, opening up to all of your colleagues saying, what am I missing? And they're giving you all this input. They're not telling you what to do. They're just serving things up for consideration. And so just the ability to sit back and widen your perspective and then go solve your problem far more productively, efficiently, and profitably was something magical that happened on a repeated basis. So that's one of my favorite things. And then I think that segues nicely into a mantra that I've been teaching now for almost 30 years, and that is life happens one conversation at a time. So often we get stressed, we get anxious, we get overwhelmed because we're trying to fix it all. And I remind leaders, whether I'm coaching, whether we're doing a training, whether it's sales or innovation, whether it's at home, we're dealing with perhaps a challenging situation, either with a spouse or a partner or a kid, it's only solved one conversation at a time. So show up for this conversation and then show up for the next one. And when you take it one conversation at a time, not only is it more manageable, you become a better communicator very quickly.
Yeah, don't eat the elephant all at once.
Yeah, exactly.
Just do it in bites and do it with a little thought along the way, and you'll make progress. Well, that's great. So this might be a curveball, but I'm going to throw it out to you anyway.
Bring it.
Think about all those speeches you've given or all the work that you've done over the years. Do you have a funny example of something that happened to you that just sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, and you know what? I'll be vulnerable on this because it was funny, not funny. I went to Aruba to give a conference to a Vistage member and all of his folks. And let's just say it did not go well. And I think we've all had those moments where we pride ourselves on building a career and delivering excellence. And I got there and it did not go over well. And here was the lesson that I learned. I delivered a speech that they said that their people needed, but that their people didn't want. And it was so interesting because about 5 minutes into my speech, I was not connecting with my audience. And I knew it in my gut. Like I knew it internally, my inner knowing was like, this is not connect. I'm giving them what they need, but it is not what they want. What I learned in that moment was, had I listened to my inner voice, had I stopped and changed the conversation that we were having, even though it was a speech, it's still a conversation. If I had changed it to connect instead of power over and give them what I thought they needed, we would have had a completely different experience. And it's a lesson that I've never forgotten, because again, whether there's 5,000 people in front of you, 5 people or 1 person, when the goal is to connect, you're going to have a way different conversation.
Yeah, that's almost a principle that you were talking about toward the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Getting people to buy in and not feel like it's being shoved down their throats. So yeah, that's brilliant.
So I learned that one the hard way.
Well, those are the best lessons when you go through life and you experience it yourself and stumble, and boy, then that's when the real learning takes place.
Yeah, it sure does.
So AmyK, how do people get a hold of you if they want to learn more about you and maybe connect with you or maybe engage you in a speech?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, we've got 2 ways to get a hold of us. One is very simple and direct, AmyK, my first name, AmyK, AmYK.com. You can learn all about us. We have tons of free resources. So I totally believe in that. Generosity is one of our core values. So check out, there's lots of free resources there. And then for women leaders, we have a whole different portal called She Gets It. And so you can go to shegetsit.com, and that is specifically for women business owners, women sales leaders, executives, senior leaders in any organization for women. And again, we have a ton of free tools there. And so if coaching, training, or mastermind programs, you can learn all about them at either of those 2 sites.
AmyK, that's very cool. Well, again, thank you so much for spending time with me today. Valuable tools for sure. And I think that people are gonna get the message and immediately put this to use. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Hopefully it's practical, and I'd love to hear about their wins.
All right. All the best, Amy.